Welcome to EnglishPass Podcast, brought to you from our local studio in Calgary. I'm your host, Samantha, and today we're diving into an exciting topic: moving out of a home. Whether you're a beginner or intermediate learner, in this podcast, we're helping you level up your English listening and reading skills. And before we get started, let me tell you that the sponsor of this episode is TypeFit, keyboard typing practice and learning service. Today, we're exploring something really interesting: moving out of a home. This is a compelling subject for English learners because it covers a lot of practical vocabulary and real-world situations. So let's dive right in. Moving out of a home is much more than just putting items into cardboard boxes and driving them to a new address. It is a major life transition that involves physical labor, financial planning, emotional adjustments, and a significant amount of legal paperwork. At its core, moving out means leaving a current place of residence to live somewhere else. This might mean moving from a parent's house to a college dormitory, leaving a rented apartment for a newly purchased house, or even relocating to a different country for work. Every move represents a shift in identity and lifestyle. Have you ever looked around your room and wondered how you managed to collect so many things over the years? That realization usually happens the moment you decide it is time to leave. To understand moving, we must first look at the legal and financial side. For many people, the process starts with a lease. A lease is a legal contract between a tenant and a landlord that outlines the terms of staying in a property. When you decide to move out, you cannot simply leave on a whim. You usually have to give a notice period, which is a formal announcement made several weeks or months in advance stating that you intend to vacate the premises. If you are a renter, you likely paid a security deposit when you moved in. A security deposit is a sum of money held by the landlord to cover any damages to the property. One of the biggest challenges of moving out is ensuring the home is clean enough to get that money back. This is where the logistics of moving truly begin. Logistics refers to the detailed organization and implementation of a complex operation. In this case, it means figuring out how to get a sofa through a narrow door, hiring a truck, and setting up new accounts for water and electricity. Let us look at a real-world example to see how this works in practice. Imagine a young woman named Alina who has just graduated from a university in a small town and accepted a job in a large city. For Alina, moving out of her student apartment is her first real taste of independence. She has to create an inventory, which is a complete and detailed list of all her possessions. She realizes that she cannot take everything with her because her new city apartment is much smaller. This brings us to a common concept called downsizing. Downsizing is the act of moving to a smaller home and reducing the number of things you own. Elena spends her weekends selling old textbooks and clothes so that she only has to move the essentials. This process is not just about space. It is also about letting go of her identity as a student to prepare for her new life as a professional. Historically, the way humans move has changed drastically. For thousands of years, many cultures were nomadic, meaning they moved constantly to find food or better weather. They did not have permanent homes filled with furniture. However, after the Industrial Revolution, people began moving from rural farms to big cities to work in factories. This was the beginning of the modern concept of moving, where people stay in one place for several years and then relocate for better opportunities. In many Western cultures, there is a strong emphasis on the fledgling stage of life. Just as a young bird leaves the nest, young adults are expected to move out of their parents' home in their late teens or early 20s to seek independence. However, this is not a universal rule. In many Mediterranean and Asian cultures, it is very common for multiple generations to live together in the same house for their entire lives. In these places, moving out might only happen when someone gets married or moves to a different city for a specific career path. Consider the case of Marco, who lives in Italy. Marco is 30 years old and still lives with his parents. In his culture, this is not seen as a lack of ambition, but rather a way to save money and support the family. When Marco finally decides to move out to live with his partner, the process is deeply emotional for the whole family. They do not just pack boxes. They share a final series of large meals and discuss the history of every item Marco takes with him. This highlights a common misconception about moving out. Many people think it is a purely mechanical task of lifting heavy objects. In reality, it is an emotional process of closing one chapter of your life. There is often a sense of grief, even if you are moving to a better place, because you are leaving behind the walls that protected you and the neighborhood you knew by heart. Another interesting example involves a family of 4, the Thompsons, who are moving from a 2-bedroom apartment to their first purchased house. This is often called the move-up. Unlike Alina, who was downsizing, the Thompsons are expanding. They have to deal with more complex logistics. They need to hire professional movers because they have heavy furniture and delicate appliances. They also have to manage the transition of utilities. Utilities are basic services like water, gas, electricity, and internet. One of the most stressful parts of moving is making sure the lights turn on in the new house the moment you arrive, while ensuring you are no longer paying for the lights in the old house. Have you ever spent a night in a new home in the dark because you forgot to call the electric company? It is a mistake most people only make once. Then there is the concept of the boomerang move. This happens when an adult who has previously moved out returns to live with their parents. This might happen because of a job loss, a breakup, or simply to save money for a future goal. Sarah, a graphic designer, moved back to her childhood home after her rent in New York City became too expensive. For Sarah, moving out the second time felt very different from the first. She was more experienced and understood the hidden costs of moving, such as buying packing tape, cleaning supplies, and insurance for her belongings. She knew that moving is not just the cost of the truck. It is the dozens of small expenses that add up quickly. As we move toward more complex ideas, we should discuss international relocation. This is perhaps the most difficult type of move. Imagine a man named Hiroshi moving from Tokyo to London. He cannot take his furniture across the ocean easily. He has to decide what is truly irreplaceable. Moving internationally involves customs regulations, visas, and a massive cultural shift. Hiroshi has to learn how to navigate a new housing market, which can be very different from his home country. In some cities, you must provide years of financial records to rent an apartment, while in others, you simply need a handshake and a deposit. This shows that moving is also an education in sociology and law. There is also a nuance to moving that involves the psychological effect of a blank slate. Many people use a move as a way to reinvent themselves. If you were shy in your old neighborhood, a new home offers a chance to be more social with new neighbors. This is why many people feel a burst of energy and productivity right after a move, despite being physically exhausted. However, experts often point out the first night effect, where people find it hard to sleep in a new environment because the brain stays alert to unfamiliar sounds and smells. It takes time for a new house to feel like a home. Finally, let us consider the retiree, Mr. Henderson, who is moving into an assisted living community after 40 years in the same large house. For him, moving out is a process of curation. He must decide which photos, books, and heirlooms can fit into a much smaller space. His move is not about the future in the way Alina's move was. It is about honoring the past while accepting a new phase of life where he needs more support. In conclusion, moving out is a universal human experience that varies wildly depending on culture, age, and economic status. Whether you are a student with 2 suitcases or a family with a massive truck, the process requires patience, organization, and a bit of courage. It is a physical manifestation of change, proving that while our belongings can be packed into boxes, our memories and experiences are what we truly carry with us to the next destination. Understanding the vocabulary of the move, from the lease to the logistics, helps make the transition smoother, but it is the personal growth that occurs during the journey that matters most. Next time you see a moving truck on your street, think about the stories inside those boxes and the new beginning that is about to unfold. Moving is never just about the destination. It is about the evolution of the person making the move and the new life they are brave enough to build. And that's all for today's episode of EnglishPass Podcast. I hope you found this helpful. Remember to practice what you've learned and don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's how we improve. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and join us next time. Let me remind you that the sponsor of the episode is TypeFit, and I suggest to check the link at the description. I'm Samantha, and I'm excited to be your host for many more fascinating episodes to come. Until then, keep learning and keep growing. Goodbye.